in this conference?
Yeah.
No, I haven't watched
I
it.
think it was on Friday. I don't know.
Probably because we talked about some strategies.
Yeah. It was mainly for the OpenShift and the platform as a service development, how to kind of maybe the similar.
Yeah.
We still have a minute because the recording is automated, so we need to start at the
Right time.
Yeah.
Actually, the percentile was the guy which is in the first slide near the ball. That was the guy. This George? Yeah. So, George, you talked about deployments on Friday. Cool.
He would be talking later.
Cool. So complete coverage of the subject.
So we can start. Let me welcome Rafael and let's learn something about deployment strategies.
So welcome everyone. Since Friday, I was talking here I've talked about microservices, I've talked about the 12 factors methodology, and in each one of these talks, I asked the same question. Who here is not a Red Hat employee? Oh, welcome you to this conference. Well, this title seems a little bit complicated, but in fact, what we will see together here now is about the deployment strategies. How we can perform zero downtime deployments using different strategies, and what tools we can use, tools from Red Hat, to improve this deployment. These slides are available in this URL. I've told that even the slides are open source, are freely available. You can use it, you can copy, you can get the slides that you want. That's something that you liked. You can access that in your mobile phone, present that in your company, present that in your local jugs and in your other communities, okay? Well, my name is Rafael Benavides. I've worked for Red Hat for more than 7 years. I started as a consultant. I was a software engineer helping to produce the Red Hat developer materials. And now I'm helping developers worldwide to be successful using Red Hat technologies, Red Hat tools, okay? And as part of this initiative to help developers, I like to invite everyone here to visit, enjoy the Red Hat Developers Program. If you go to this URL, developers.redhat.com, you will find this portal which has a lot of resources for developers. You will find free access to our products, you will find free ebooks, you will find blog posts, and many things that we think that might help your development process, okay? And since that we are talking about development, I like to start this presentation with this phrase from Forbes. Now every company is a software company. Have you thought about that? If you think about that, you will notice that the biggest companies in the world are now software company. Uber, for example, doesn't own any car. It's a app. It's a software product, and it's now the biggest transportation company in the world. The same is true, for example, for Airbnb. It doesn't have any houses, and they are the largest accommodation company in the world. We can think also about Alibaba. It doesn't have any stock, but it's one of the largest selling company in the world. What else? Facebook. Facebook's the largest content provider of the world. Sometimes we can question the kind of content that they are providing, but still, this is Facebook's the largest content provider company in the world. But in common to every company, including the company that you work, because if you think about that, you don't work for a bank, you don't work for a hospital, you work for a software company. And when you receive a request, when these companies receive a request to implement, to create a new feature, usually it takes like 3 months to plan, develop, start the QA, and finally deploy that in production, right? But something that you might consider is the kind of learning that you receive when you are developing a software, because when you put a software in production, you will verify its errors, you will verify if it's behaving, if it's accomplishing the requirements just when it reaches the production, right? For example, suppose that you implemented a selling feature that will increase the sales in 10%. Only when it reaches the production, you will find out if it's increased 5% or 10% or 15%. You need the software to be in production to learn with the result of the deployment. And this is part of what's called feedback loop. I've talked about that when I was talking about microservices. Because everything in our life as a human being depends on the feedback loop. When we are learning how to walk, we depend on the gravity to know about the feedback, to have a feedback from the gravity if we are walking right. When we are learning how to speak, we depend on the feedback of our parents to say, this is the right pronunciation. No, my son, this is the right one. You are talking wrongly. So we always depend on the feedback to learn something. But when you take like 3 months to deploy a software in production, you are sending a lot of pushes, a lot of commits. Imagine, in 3 months, how many commits, Git commits, or subversion commits you have in 3 months. Probably you will have hundreds of changes in your code. And the problem with that is, how do you identify if something is not wrong? What was the commit that caused that failure? What was the change that made your software that was stable to not perform okay, to be unstable, to crash, or something else? The problem with that is the size of the batch. As many things we tend to send to the production, more things we can try to understand, we can try to debug to see if that was the cause of the problem or not. So every time that we reduce the size of our batch, we can also easily identify what was the cause and have more fine-grained look up for problem or issues or feedback. So, for example, if you reduce the size of your commit, for example, suppose that instead of sending to the production 100 of commits, and you send just the commits of 1 week, it will be easy for you to identify any problems, and that allows you to learn faster. Because if you send something in production in January and send another one in April, you will have a certain amount of learning. If you deploy frequently, if you deploy very often, you will increase your cycle of learning, your cycle of feedback, and very likely, you will also increase the innovation of your software. But the problem is, how can you deploy many times a week, many times a day? Well, that's why we'll talk about the deployment patterns. And before talking about that, we have to understand that even Microsoft have a problem with the learning curve or the feedback about the software. Because this phrase became very famous. This guy, Ronnie, he worked for Amazon. He is now working with Microsoft. And he said that even in Microsoft, 1/3 of the ideas improve the result. The other 2/3 are just discarded because it was not good. It was implemented, then they figure out about using the feedback loop that it was not a good idea and has to be discarded. Okay, so when we want to deploy, we usually have the maintenance windows. So how many of you have ever worked Friday midnight to deploy a software? a couple of people, right? Sometimes Saturday in 4 a.m. because this is the time that people are not using software. How many of you have to face this goals here, the maintenance windows? It's true that we don't like to do that. We would like to have a kind of mechanism, a kind of strategy that we could place our software in the production with zero downtime, and being certain that software will work the way that we want. So one of the keys that we will cover in this talk is the zero downtime deployment. And to perform zero downtime deployments, we will talk about different strategies, and I will show to you how we can use those strategies. The first one is called the rolling update. And it's called rolling because we will suppose that we have 3 replicas of this version number 1 in the production. Let's call this version as version blue. And we have several clients, several customers accessing those versions. Of course, to be able to balance the request, we have a proxy in the middle. And to deploy the version 2.0, in this case it's called I'm calling it as a green version, we need to replace each one of them at a time. So for example, we can remove the version 1 from the proxy, introduce the version 2, and something that we should consider is the time that it takes the application to be available, right? Because, for example, some application servers take like 2 minutes to boot, some others take 1 minute, others can take 10 minutes to warm up the application, to connect to the database, make sure that the cache is warm, it's set up, everything in its place. So sometimes the application takes between 1 minute to 10 minutes to be ready to receive requests. So when the application is ready is the moment that we can start sending requests to that version, right? We cannot send requests until the application is ready, because if it's deploying, probably those customers, those clients that are accessing that version will receive a 404 error. So an important thing to do in everything related to deployment is know when your application is live and ready. Okay? So once that the version 2 is live, is ready, we can send requests to to that version, and then we can start rolling this deployment to another version, and gradually these customers will receive the new version. So let's see how we can perform that. You saw that something that is extremely necessary in this kind of strategy is to use a proxy in the middle. What I will do to demo this kind of strategy is use OpenShift. I have here prepared a demo version. It's just a REST endpoint that I can access an URL here. For example, I can call API hello Bernoulli, and that will reply what I use here as a parameter. Okay, it's a very simple application. I have here 3 replicas, and I have also this the result of the invocation running in my console. So each one of these from hello, the parameter that I'm using, and the from is the number of the hosts that I have available here. Okay. So what I will do now is do a modification in my source code and deploy that. And the idea, something that I really like about this talk, is because it makes me feel like doing an adventure, because I will deploy the software and hopefully with 0 downtime. So let's do it. Let's do a modification here in the source code. And here is the phrase. So you don't need to worry about that, but I will write here version 2. And now I will build this demo. It's just let me increase the font size. It's just a normal Maven build, but at the end of the Maven build, I will call a build inside OpenShift. So there you can see the rolling deployment, because it creates the environment. You can see that it's not live, it's not ready yet. And once it becomes ready, it starts to shut down and create a new one. So in a couple of seconds, you will see the new version becoming available during the deployment. So you can see that the requests that I'm doing are not going to the version 2 until it becomes alive. So now that the 3 versions are available, it shut down the version, the previous version, and now all requests are being made in the version 2. What I've used here is the default strategy for deploying applications inside OpenShift, because OpenShift already have a proxy in this address that balances the request to these 3 nodes, these 3 pods here. Okay. So what else we can do as a strategy for a deployment? We can do what's called blue-green deployment. The difference of the blue-green deployment is because you usually have one version, which is called blue again, but to be able to change that version to another, again, you need a proxy, you need something in the middle that allows you to deploy a new version called green, and in this new version, you will select between the blue and the green version. If something goes wrong with the green version, you can just return the route back. You can point the proxy back to the version blue if something goes wrong. So let's see how we can perform the deployment using blue-green. As you can see here, I have this version that I've deployed. That was my green version. And I have another one here called Demo Blue. So I have the 2 parallels, 2 similar applications. It's just different between them related to the version. This one I deployed 5 minutes ago, and this one have been deployed like 16 hours ago when I was preparing this environment. So what I will do now is, since the application is already there, I don't need to deploy a new version, I can use the OpenShift to change the route from one application to another. So let me change. Let me place the window here. You can see that I have the route pointing to this version, and when I ask to select the blue version, the route, click, will change from here to here, and the result of my application have changed immediately. So that's how I can also perform a zero downtime deployment. I create another version of the environment and just switch the route from one version to another. But suppose that I didn't like this version. It has a problem. It's not performing well. It has a bug, and I want to return to the previous version. It's easy as changing the route again to the version green. Zero downtime deployments. The route moved from here to here. Something really, really easy. Another strategy that we can do is called canary deployments. Something that I like about canary deployments is why it has this name. Because when I heard about this story, it was really interesting, because it came from the mine workers. When people went through the mines, the gas mines to work, they always were always carrying a canary with them. If the canary was happy, if the canary was singing, it means that there was no gas leaking, they would survive. But if the canary stopped singing, that would mean that they have a problem, they have a gas leaking, and they should run out of the cave, of the mine, as quick as possible. So the idea of the canary deployments is more or less the same, because we will introduce this new version as a canary. It's just a small amount of requests will arrive in the canary version, and then if the canary still sings, if your application is still being good, you can increase the requests to this version, and as more you become comfortable, as more you become, as more you trust on that version, you can keep increasing. And if something goes wrong, for example, if you try to add like 200 requests on that application, if that application is not capable of receiving 200 requests, you can just reduce the number, and it will work again until you deploy a new version. So let's see how we can perform canary deployments using OpenShift. You can see here that these versions are splitted. I could choose using the route, using blue-green deployments between this version or that version. But what I will do now is join both of them under the same route. Canary unify. When I do that, both will receive the request. And something interesting is that since I have 3 versions of this and 1 version of the old one, the canary one, each 3 requests on this version, 1 will be made in the canary. So I can check and I can verify how my canary application is behaving. If I'm comfortable with that, I can, for example, increase the number of canary to 2, reduce this one from 3 to 2, and you will see the number of the requests in the canary increasing and decreasing. Now I have 50-50, 2 in this one, 2 in this new in the previous one, and I can keep selecting how many requests will be made on the Canary version. I can even shut down totally the previous version, and now all requests will be made only in the version that I've selected. And if something goes wrong, I can return again this to 3, shut down the previous version, or even remove it from... I've shut down it very quickly, so that will probably give me an error, because I don't have any version responding yet. But I can even split... remove the canary from the project, and now my route only points to the existing version. This error here was because I have shut down the version completely. Okay, with these 3 main kinds of deployments, it allows us to understand what is A/B testing. Because many people think that A/B deployments are A/B testing. There is no A/B deployments. There is A/B testing, because the idea of A/B testing is just like a canary, but canary is the technique to deploy a small portion of your new version, and then you can try to see if it behaves well, if there is no bug. But the idea behind the A/B testing is to test an hypothesis. So suppose that you have an hypothesis that if you change your button from the bottom of the screen to the top of the screen, you think your hypothesis suggests to you that you will have the increase of the sales. You can test that. You can use the canary deployment and test from the business perspective if the sales have increased or not. Suppose that you have another hypothesis. If you change the logos of the recommendations, or suppose that you change the logo of the product, or even instead of showing the recommendation, you show the location of the nearest store. All of these are business hypotheses. It's not related with the deployments, but you can use canary deployments to analyze the behavior of your application using A/B testing. And of course, what I did here was directly in the production, right? But it's not good to deploy in the production. So we should always think in deploying using a continuous integration in a continuous delivery pipeline. Because Jess Humble, who is the author of the continuous integration book, said that continuous delivery is the ability to get the changes of all types, including new features, configuration changes, bug fixes, and experiments into production or into the hands of the users, because the software only has value to the users once it reaches the production, safely, quickly, and in a sustainable way. And of course, the purpose of the pipeline is to prove that the release candidate is unreleasable. That means that your pipeline has to have a lot of good and automated tests that will prove that the software is not releasable. If it passes through the tests, then you are good to go automatically. Almost any human interaction. Of course, you can configure the pipeline to be completely automated, or you can request a human interaction to deploy it in the production. So let's see how that looks. The idea is that everything starts with git commit and a git push. Once that your source code is in the repository, then any continuous integration tool, like for example Jenkins, I will use Jenkins here in the demo, will get the source code, perform a build that will be released in the development stage. In the development stage, you can run the unit tests, and if it's okay to running the unit test, you can deploy that in the quality assurance, and probably there you will run the integration tests. If the software is okay in the QA area, you can then move it automatically to the staging area. And for the staging, probably the QA team will test it, some other guy will test it, and if it approves, it can go to the production. And once it reaches in production, then you will use one of the strategies that we talked about. You could use the rolling deployment. There is no problem on that. You can deploy this new version using blue-green, or you can deploy it using canaries. So let's see how we can perform deployments using a pipeline. I have here another application that I presented during the microservice talk that has several microservices. Each microservice uses different technology and responds hello in different languages. So one of them is Hawaiian. I don't know how many of you speaks Hawaiian, but it should be aloha instead of aloha. Okay? So this is wrong. I have here a window that's consuming this resource. You can see that it replies aloha. So we need to fix that. And what I have here also deployed in OpenShift is a Jenkins instance. Oops, let's authenticate again. I have a Jenkins instance, and by the way, look here, the image name. It's called OpenShift/Jenkins, which means that it's an image provided by OpenShift. It's a supported image. So let's open. Hopefully, I will not have problem with the internet. Oh no, it seems that I have problem with the internet or something. So let's try to shut down this instance and start a new one just to make sure. Yeah, people say that it usually happens when you don't sacrifice Windows Millennium CDs to the demo gods when you are about to prepare a demo. So I forgot to bring some Windows Millennium CDs to this presentation. But here is a good example for what I told about readiness and liveness probe, because if I try to access this application, you see the service unavailable, right? Because I don't have any instance here. And I also have not configured the readiness and liveness probe. So OpenShift doesn't know for this particular service that the service is ready to receive requests. But let's try to access this one. Now I can access. I have here already configured a pipeline for this service. And to build this service, I need a kind of interaction with OpenShift. So I need to provide the credentials that I will use. So let me update these credentials. This was supposed to be already set when I started the talk, but we need to do it again. So let me show you something to you. Here in Jenkins, I have configured the pipeline to read from this location here, to read the source code from GitHub, and also inside the GitHub, it will read a script file called Jenkins file. So inside this service, I have a file called Jenkins file that defines my pipeline. What are the existing stages? So I have a stage that will perform a Git checkout. So it will check out from the source code that I defined inside Jenkins. So you can see that I have defined it here. Yeah. No. Yeah, I have defined it here, the repository. Then it will build my project using Maven. Then it will build it and deploy it in my development stage, run the automated tests, deploy in the QA area, and wait for an approval. If it's approved, then it will deploy in the production using the canary deployment. So let's see if what's happening during the build that I have already requested. Let me change the credentials again. And once that Jenkins starts, you can see that the pipeline will use what I've defined in the Jenkins file. Let's just make sure that the console is running. Yes, it's running. So it will deploy it in the development stage. You can see that my build is running inside Jenkins, but Jenkins have interacted with OpenShift, created and deployed the image in the development stage. You can see that in the development stage it will perform a rolling deployment. And something that you can notice is that the image that have been deployed is 2A55918. This is the hash code of the image. The next step of the pipeline here was to deploy, run the automated test and deploy in the quality assurance area. So the quality assurance area in this demo is another namespace. So if you check here, it has the same hash of the image. So it deployed it promoted the image from the development to this namespace called quality assurance. So now suppose that I'm a quality assurance guy, I can open the application and verify if it's working. If it's not Aloha, but it's not Aloka, but Aloha. So I can invoke the service myself and note that this is another route. So it's hello world and dash MSA dash QA of quality assurance. I can see that it's now replying what I want to. And look here, the hash code is 2A. But if we return to production, the Aloha hash is D39 because it's waiting for an approval from someone else. So since I have tested, I'm sure that I can proceed the deployment in the production. So let's see what will happen. I said to perform a canary deployment. I had a problem here, as I told you, I forgot to sacrifice Windows Millennium CDs, but it deployed that version, the D39 2F, in a canary deployment with the 2A 55918. So now I have both versions running because I've selected in the Jenkins file to perform a canary deployment. So now that I'm comfortable with the canary, I can, for example, reduce that, increase that version, reduce this version, and finally have just one running in production. So these are the steps and strategies that you could use to perform a deployment. We have now some minutes to talk and discuss, and if you have any questions, to do that at this moment.
When you deploy several versions of same servers, isn't it a problem when from one client there are requests going to different versions of one service?
That's a good point. The question was, isn't it a problem when you are deploying several versions of the same application, responding in the same URL? Isn't that a problem? Well, what kind of problems we could have? The first one would be people usually ask, what about the state of the application? This is a very common question. And the answer for that is to avoid using state. Because on Friday I've talked about the 12 factor, and one of the factors is, let me find it, process. Execute the app as one or more stateless process. If it's stateless, there is no problem to access a different version. But we could also have another problem, which is I've changed my payload, I've changed my contract. I'm using the version 1, and now my new version expects the version 1 and 2. And this is the very important, because your application during the update, it should allow a backward compatibility with some previous version. How you can do that? Using, for example, in the payload, the version that you are using. This is very common, for example, in even OpenShift. So suppose that I'm do here OC edit DC demo. Let me see if it's that. Yeah. If you notice here the payload, I have defined here that I'm sending this data as the API version 1. So if I decide to release the version 2, my application should be able to understand V1 and V2 at the same time, at least for a certain amount of time. And if it and the client has to say, I'm sending V1 to you, so the server will identify and treat that as V1. And if the client sends V2, then the server itself will treat it as a V2. That's a kind of evolutionary design. Plus, something that I didn't show here, but I can do it, is the kind of route that we are using. One of the things that I did was to specify, let me see here, I think it's the service. Yeah, it's, no, let me find. I don't think I have set that. Condition, outer. But I was looking, you can specify session affinities in the router. So for example, suppose that one client access one server, one version of the server. The route of OpenShift will always send the same client to the same version. New clients will receive the new version because you are tracking the session affinity to the client. So you can have round robin, for example. OpenShift does not control that, but you can also have a session affinity defined. So I thought that I have defined that here, but I thought it wrongly. But it's an option to define a session affinity.
So basically we have two ways. One way you should control the version in your application.
Yeah, but that's a purpose for evolutionary design. It's not really related to software deployment. And the second way is use a session affinity to avoid having the client sending requests to one version and another because it's not stuck with a particular version.
How would you deal with schema changes in the database, like in a similar question as the previous one? When you really have changes on the schema, is there any advice that you can follow, any technique that you can follow to roll them like partially or pull back?
Cool. So the question was how to handle schemas update in the database. And the best answer that I can think for that is the abstraction. Because you should not talk directly to your database. Instead, you have a service that expects a payload. For example, you have a REST service that expects a JSON in a certain format. Suppose that you are, let's talk about the customer database, the customer table. In the version 1, you stored the name and the address. And in the version 2, you decided to store the name, the address, and the phone number. You changed the database. But so you expect in the database to have the telephone number available. But since your application needs to be backward compatible, what you will do is the version 2 will verify if the telephone number was informed. If it's not informed, it will give an error because that's part of the use case version 2. You have updated your use case, but the use case number 1 still needs to work. So your tests during the pipeline should test also the version 1. And for version 1, if you do not send the telephone number, you can, for example, insert a default value in the database. It's one of the strategies because you are not breaking the compatibility to version 1 clients. It was not expected on that time, so just insert a default value in the telephone number. It can be a default value called update me later, something like that, or inserted by version 1, something that later you can track down and for business reasons say, okay, let's send a letter to the customer and ask him to provide the phone number by logging in again the application. Just as use case that I imagine in my mind. You're welcome. Questions? Okay, so I really appreciate your presence here. Once more, don't forget to register and subscribe to the developers portal. And also, if you like to continue this conversation, you can add me in the Twitter. This is my Twitter handle. I'll be very pleased to answer your questions or receive any feedback from this presentation using Twitter or also sending an email. By the way, the demo that I've used of the Hello World MSA, the one that uses microservices, is here, and the scripts that I've used to perform the canary deployment, it's here, and it uses different versions. I have one demo using EAP, another one using Vertex, another one using Wildfly Swarm. For each one of them, you have the comments here on how to do the build, how to select, how to change the route, how to consume the service. And one thing interesting is that on this EAP demo, it uses session replication. Just to show how we can store state, and during the deployment, the state will be moved from the session of the one version to another version. Of course, this is not a recommended way in cloud native, in cloud applications, but just to show that it's possible to do it using EAP. So, thank you so much.
He's not going to make it. Sorry.
Foi lá e mudou para presenteio.
Como é que é?
Eu vi o corretor ortográfico, fui escrever presentation e ele colocou presenteio.
You were quite prepared for the presentation, even with the trials for.
But at the last time, something went wrong, as always.
Yeah, but you managed to fix it.
Yeah. Just nothing that I shut down and start again.
Even though the setting password twice, but still okay. Well prepared.
Thank you. I forgot to trigger
The timer
the timer.
happens to me all the time.
Now let's try
I had a good
to.
opportunity to go grab some food and go back to another presentation.
I got the burger, but I had to wait for it like 15 minutes. Long time. Okay. So let's see how this one goes.
We'll talk about Archelian Cube now.
Sorry?
You will be talking about Archelian Cube now,
Yes.
right? I see that there's Archelian Cube and Cube in your presentation. What is Cube?
So Cube is for controlling and orchestrating Docker containers for your tests, whereas KubeQ is a small extension on top of it, which adds chaos containers to your tests. So it's just using Cube, but it's a different extension. So it's
Cube is about Docker Swarm, Docker Compose.
Docker,
right?
in general Docker. And then KubeQ uses Cube to have Docker containers, but what it does, it in between injects proxies or controls the containers so that you can introduce chaos to your system. So you can like tear down containers or introduce some latency, which I'll be showing, and this kind of chaos stuff.
Okay. So it doesn't have any relationship with the CER from the Cloud Enablement team, right?
Sorry?
It doesn't have any relationship with that extension the Cloud Enablement team is working.
Well, actually, we do work with Cloud Enablement guys and Fabricate to bring all the common bits they have to Cube. So we have Kubernetes control now, which is
brought by Fabricate and then OpenShift from Cloud Enablement. So we try to make it one because there are 3 different ones at the moment. Whereas the Cloud Enablement and Fabricate is using Cube.
Yeah,
so
it's driving us crazy because of it.
So you're working there?
Yeah, I work with the guy who was doing that work to
John
take this
Vandal
year.
or?
John Vandal.
Okay. See you around, man.
See you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, so we were working with you guys so I know it's like a sidetrack activity, so there is no commitment to do it within a certain amount of time. So it's like small fixes here, small pull requests there, but the main goal would be to bring it all together so that we have one, and then your team would be probably using some smaller extensions.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, let me just plug in everything. Yeah, thanks. See you around. Okay. So let's see how it is. Not yet. I mean, now it's gonna be a bit different way of presenting because I don't have a mirroring, and I'll be doing live demos, so I will have only this screen. But that's gonna be. No, I cannot. The thing is, my Fedora doesn't support it. I cannot enable it. So I'll be just doing it.
I'm asking the technical whether this screen
Okay.
on the right side.
So that we will be showing the same here. That would be super handy.
Dá se.
Jakože tady tuhle tu základní obrazovku počítačů.
V podstatě to by bylo to isté jako projektor.
Where's the HDMI?
Ale,
Tato obrazovka.
ale potom nebudu moc robiť na tom prezentovat se to počítač nebudu moc.
Jaký je dotaz?
Protože nefunguje mirroring, takže nebude vidět, či na svém počítači. Projektor namirovat na tom právě. A ty počítač to nejde na
To je počítač, no, celé.
Tak nedá se.
Takže to nebude.